Yeah.
Hi, Peter. Welcome to the podcast. A great pleasure to have you. You are a successful advisor, an investor, an industry leader in automotive and manufacturing. And of course, a natural question is, what did your journey look like? Would you mind just shedding a little bit of light on your past decades of experience in the industry and beyond?
Okay, thanks a lot for having me here. Yeah, and so starting with my background, I've been in consulting for 29 years or so. Now a year retired from the main corporate consulting business. In automotive since about 2000, with clients in various roles, mainly automotive, bit of manufacturing. I've been responsible in the past for the CE region within EY Consulting, focused on the automotive sector. But what I do now, I'm still senior advisor supporting EY in the sector across the region. I've co-founded a GenAI startup, which is almost a year old, called NoDroids.ai. And I do also my freelance consulting, specifically strategic projects and growth agendas for my clients, mainly automotive and manufacturing again, and in one case also developing their AI strategy. So yeah, interesting stuff.
Awesome. That's super exciting. A couple of topics I would come back to throughout our conversation. But to kick things off a little broader, I've seen that you worked for a number of years in the automotive industry, especially in sales and distribution with NSCs, with retailers, amongst others. What are some of the big trends you've seen in the automotive industry over the past couple of years?
Well, there's been a lot going on. I mean, it's a never-ending story, and I think every year is a year of bigger challenges, it seems, at least for the legacy players, the legacy OEMs. So when I start from the downstream, from the distribution and sales points, which I'm mostly involved in, you see kind of a huge emancipation of customers, of the digital and connectivity requirements, and perceiving the product through different lenses. You're really looking for something which is part of your digital life ecosystem, rather than simply a great performance and a fantastic technical parameters. So that's clear. That's coming more and more with GenAI, if they got driver's license at all. And of course, you got huge workforce challenges to really provide services in the retail and wholesale side. You have to absolutely look for good motivated people, which is becoming a bigger challenge almost anywhere in the world. But we of course perceive it a lot in Europe and Central Europe, and also the technology that you have to master for the full great CX, the customer experience, in terms of whatever you can do with video, with online, how you present yourself in the digital world, because you really now have one to maximum two physical touch points to see the client on average. Otherwise, you have to deal with them virtually.
Mm-hmm. You already mentioned the topic of GenAI there. If you would look across the automotive industry and would have to describe the state of GenAI in the industry, what would you say to someone who isn't necessarily so involved in the weeds as potentially someone like myself is?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I think it varies. On average, I would say still the experimenting stage, the proof of concept stage. I still haven't seen kind of a major scaled up application that would be having a major business impact at the moment, especially when we look at GenAI, right? When we talk in the sector about the AI and machine learning and computer vision, there have been a number of applications, and they actually now scaling in many cases, and they got a huge impact, especially on the operation side and the manufacturing on the factory side. So that's a great field, and I think the automotive is only now starting to reap the benefits of it. In GenAI, we're really in the early stages, like in most sectors that we touch with NoDroids.ai. We also work for other sectors, and we see that most of the back office processes are only trying to find their best use in the GenAI. Of course, the call centers and contact centers probably being now the first ones to scale. We see some agendas like lawyers, like some research topics being automated in many ways. If we talk now about at NoDroids, we call it a droid, someone who is like your artificial colleague or co-worker. in the era of or in the area of personal efficiency and enhancement of your individual performance, I think we are much further there because the people really started experimenting. It's going to be close to 2 years by now, right? With a big ChatGPT bank. So the people themselves, how they prepare text, how they research, how they summarize topics, how they enhance their PowerPoint presentations with images, how they handle their meeting minutes, etc., etc. I mean, this is already a topic which is pervasive, and the white collars are really helping themselves out. So on the individual level, they're really moving ahead. But if you look at the organizational level, I think we are less advanced than on the individual level at the moment.
Mm. Before coming back to the opportunities, risk, and use cases potentially in a moment, tell us a little bit more about your startup, Nodroid. What specifically do you do? Who are your customers, etc.?
Yeah, well, we started it in August, so almost a year old startup by now. We really went into it at the moment when it was clear that this has got a technology which can be used and leveraged for specific cases. And as I mentioned, we develop so-called droids. So all of our solutions are something droid. So we got a norm droid, we got a research droid, we got a stunted droid, and many others as enhancement to the organizational competency in especially the back office processes. So it's pretty generic. Most of our solutions are pretty much sector agnostic at this stage because they can enhance any back office, be it a call center for a bank or a utility in our cases, or an insurance company, or be it an automotive dealer. Or we have a research droid as one of our kind of repetitive solutions where we enhance the capability of the organization to really outsource the ability to research a topic, a market, a product, and periodically look for what is available on in the public domain in terms of the new updates and knowledge. And we also got this norm droid, which I think is one of those that has got a great potential across sectors and organizations. And we also now starting with a few automotive players, one manufacturing, one import organization, which is called in our lingo the norm droid. And it means basically give us, talking to our client, give us your knowledge in terms of the internal procedures and guidelines, etc., etc. We will distill it, absorb it, and periodically update, of course, to be useful, and have the interface, simplifying a GenAI interface, which allows for tailored questions and very much tailored responses by the technology. If you want to understand the process, you will get a description of the process, you will get the relevant guidelines, and it will be all, or is all, kind of reflecting your position, your responsibility. So whoever is the relevant approval for your expense report, for example, if you're looking for a specific question like that, you will get that response right away. So it's very much helpful to get through the myriads of the internal procedures. And we typically have thousands, up to dozens of thousands of documents of this sort, which form the internal legislation, so to speak, of our client.
That's super fascinating, and just from my own experience, can definitely see lots of relevant use cases in organizations I've worked with. Circling back a little bit to the automotive industry more widely, you already alluded to initially that loads of automotive players are quite careful and very much in these sort of initial early stages of development. Have you seen any particularly good or bad examples of automotive companies and their approach to GenAI on an organizational level?
Yeah, well, I haven't seen, of course, everything. I don't work with the US players, so maybe there's something in there. And of course, I have no doubts that we also don't see that much on what is going on in China and their ecosystems. But in Europe overall, with some of the bigger players that we work with, we see the attempts to simplify the customer care agenda and have some automation on the side of the communication, relatively sophisticated voice bots that are being already used in production in communication with clients and giving them a guide through specific processes, such as negotiating a used car deal, or having specific questions regarding the process, or updates, or service questions, kind of in terms of how do I handle a specific situation. So the more kind of structured areas, there the companies seem to be already ready to go out with it and risk the teasing and tough questions that can possibly, of course, have a reputational damage if not handled well. So that is being used, of course, also on the websites. When you interpreting kind of the content of the website, that is something that almost nobody now really searches these days. So the relatively dumb chatbots that you can still see around most of the internet, the GenAI can make it a really fairly intelligent conversational partner that gets you through and gives you the links of the relevant topics and details of the topics that you're searching through web. So these two kind of applications, and then of course the themes that we generally know that this is pretty good skill of the GenAI topics is preparing, for example, marketing descriptions and campaigns and events. So this is where we also see it being used here very often. Also, still human in the loop. So having some check of before it really goes out massively. So, but that's, I think, still pretty common that you're trying to have some human intervention or possible kind of veto before it goes out. So I would pick these two from the visible ones. And then the examples of the ones I mentioned also around Node-ROIDs is the ones that we see being tested around R&D. Oh, sorry, one more example. In the R&D, we now in advanced discussions also as EY now on supporting the PMO agenda and the project managers themselves, where you have really complex demands on how to run a project, especially a complex R&D project, multi-year one. So how to use properly the methodology and be guided a bit, what are the steps and stage gates, etc., and milestones that you have to follow, and also help you pre-fill some of the necessary forms like meeting minutes, status reports, and so on. So supporting the project manager in the documentation and administration.
You mentioned initially that one of the risks some of these big organizations face is potential reputational risk. I was just wondering, what are some of the other risk areas that you have become aware of, or hurdles that some of these big incumbents need to overcome if they want to be successful with GenAI?
Well, when I take it more generally, kind of what are the challenges into successful application, right? Which I think we would be touching also governance and ethical and responsibility themes, of course. But before we get to those, I think there are also other obstacles earlier on the journey, which is really understanding what you want to use GenAI or AI more generally for, like, and how ambitious you are. So do you really want to use it as transformation of parts of your business, or you want to have it as a little enhancement, or you want to really go very low risk in experimentation phase first, right? So this is one of the first decisions which determines how you approach it. Second, I think it's extremely important to have a clear vision how you prepare the organization for it if you go big, because I mean any change is difficult. Sometimes we seem to be forgetting that we have had number of technological revolutions that ended up really badly or bringing much less benefits than we were expecting, be it ERP, CRMs, you name it, blockchains of the world. And it's still the same theme, right? The people want to have their security. They have to understand it. They have to participate. They have to have kind of some autonomy. They have to have kind of relationships in the workplace, et cetera, et cetera. And you have to really address it. So the organizational change management stream is extremely important. And another one which I would mention is also the capabilities and skills to really deliver on it. It's the IT skills, it's the technology understanding, it's the data, of course, it's the infrastructure. Is your cloud ready for it? How secure and safe you want to be in terms of ring fencing your data, et cetera, et cetera. So that's another theme. And then also to some extent reskilling, and now getting to the more difficult items. If you really have a solution where you automate part of the jobs, so how do you really redefine that area, your processes or your tasks? There's a very interesting book that I got really inspired in many of these client discussions, which is called Work Without Jobs, and really stipulating that it's very often the case, and in my case has been always, you almost never automate the whole job. You automate some tasks of it. Some tasks of it you can handle by freelancers, for example. And then you have the remaining, I don't know what, 20, 30, 40% of the original job. So how do you reset the job for your full-time employees that you're still keeping? How do you redefine? How do you keep these people motivated by maybe rotating the tasks a bit, and the tasks may be automated in another half year or year? So much more dynamic approach to your organization. This is a huge challenge. The typical HR department or leadership or managers, especially in automotive, which is very conservative, very hierarchical, very technically determined, and try to be relatively slow moving and low risk. This is a huge challenge, how to be more dynamic in terms of reflecting the automation opportunities you have, but still understanding it's rarely the case that it's one-to-one fully automated job with all the tasks that you have in the job description at the moment. So these are some of the challenges. Sorry, I'm talking maybe a bit more, so just jump in or direct me.
That was fascinating. You mentioned that skills and technology are arguably critically to the success of some of these use cases, which sort of links to, I guess, the age-old question of strategic management, of how do we differentiate and what do we want to do internally and what do we want to do externally, or where do we want to partner with some of these big organizations. Of course, we've got at the moment companies like NVIDIA, we've got OpenAI, we've got AWS, all of them playing more widely in the GenAI space. I was just wondering what your current perspectives are on the relationship between big automotive companies and some of these tech companies, and how do you think GenAI might change the dynamic here?
Yeah, this is what we see, kind of the big high-level partnerships, especially on the product level at this stage, trying to enhance the product, which I think sooner or later, rather sooner, we'll have to move in terms of the experience to much better voice control and more intelligent response by the car to the demands and expectations of the owner or driver, or, well, whoever will be operator at some stage, with some autonomy of the car, of course, increasing. So that is what I think is most visible, most advertised. So GenAI playing the intelligent interpreter or translator of what the driver wants. On the kind of wider level, to be cloud players, to be effectively using the data they gathering, maybe pre-processing the data, etc. The GenAI can also play a very useful role in these tasks, which are much more hidden for a generic user, but can determine to what extent you're successful in the SDV, the software-defined vehicle initiatives, and enhancing and regularly updating the quality, the software quality of the car, i.e. the whole experience with the car. And now we see this is the battle where the legacy OEMs, especially the European ones, are now struggling to keep pace, and they need to adopt some of the competencies and mindsets and ways of thinking of the big tech players that are much more iterative, much more agile, much more experimenting in the way, because you can do that with the software or part of it, especially in the infotainment and the interactive part, which is not linked to critical car systems. You can do it differently than you do with the critical mechanical or software components in the car itself. So I think this is a very mutually beneficial partnership to move ahead, but also they should be partnering in the way they're transforming the organizations internally in the respect that we were discussing a minute ago, in terms of changing the internal setup, the internal efficiencies. There also should be an ecosystem of partners, maybe not necessarily the big tech, but their partners, their application developers, the whole ecosystem of skills and capabilities in different sub areas of the Gen AI and specific tools that are now mushrooming, and the open source models also maybe eating up part of the pie and making it cheaper to implement. Lots of things really going on. I mean, it's amazing how much is happening over the week when we just, in our 15 people in the Node Droids, we just trying to get updated, and it's amazing how much is going on.
Mm. Lots of these organizations, or all of the big organizations at least, they experiment with these Gen AI use cases. And it feels like, and I've seen a statistic the other day that only sort of 2 or 3% of these use cases actually scale currently. Why do you think that's the case, that there seem to be quite a lot of use cases that on a surface level can benefit from Gen AI as an underlying technology, but don't really lead to these, I guess, upsides that the initial sort of business cases potentially were promising?
Well, it's a great question. I think this has been kind of the theme question for Gen AI most of this year, when the whole kind of monetization and the positive business impact question has been raised, because last year was kind of a huge hype. Let's try, let's explore, let's be amazed by the technology. But as always, then the valley of despair, like we have seen so many times on so many technologies, and some of the analysts are always nicely showing the stage you're at is now coming, right? So show me the money, and you realize that it's. I think part of that is really the organization is not really able to adapt and adjust to fully leverage the capabilities that or the value that Gen AI can bring it in the line, as I was saying a while ago, in terms of not the whole job will be automated. So it's much more difficult task than saying automate for me these 12 guys and the whole of their agenda. Okay, doesn't work. Second is the approach to the change. And I also already alluded to that. And it's my kind of 30-year theme, because I was mainly as a consultant implementing changes to organizations. And I know how badly we can do on that, no matter what change it is. And here, to some extent, it seemed like magic, to everyone understandable, fascinating technology. But it's like always, people are afraid. People are not willing to change, and unless they have a really good reason and are part of the change and can influence it, etc., etc. So the change, another obstacle. And frankly, also, the technology is still not perfect, far from perfect. We are fine-tuning some of our cases for several months to be really providing the level of accuracy that the client is expecting. And sometimes they're expecting really completely flawless. It's a bit like the autonomous driving in the automotive space, right? We won't introduce it until it's 100%. I mean, it will never be fully 100%. And we as humans are whatever, 85%, or I don't know, but we want it so much better than the human that we are still not there, frankly, on the Gen AI on many fronts.
You mentioned a couple of times then also initially workforce implications of Gen AI, and I've seen loads of organizations that currently still ban any form of Gen AI sort of organizational-wide, that focus on the very sort of senior leadership level in terms of development programs. But there doesn't really seem to be this clear path in a lot of organizations in terms of what are the implications for our workforce of Gen AI? I was just wondering, what is your current perspective, and do you have any recommendations or thoughts on how organization can manage this transition in terms of what does it actually mean for the people across the board?
Yeah. So it really depends. Let's assume that you want to play big, right? In the Gen AI space, you really want to have impact. You're spreading it. You've got ambassadors. You're trying to really find good use cases, prioritize, and run them through. In that case, we saw it also with one of the EY clients. A big reskilling program was initiated along the chain, so that it's comforting for the employees. They're not being left behind. It's not an initiative which should eliminate half of them, but it's something where they still seen valuable in many areas. It will be gradual, and the people that are staying or willing to stay, they will be reskilled at the expense of the company and provided with valuable skills that can be applied with the company and also outside, right? So giving additional value to the labor market value, so to speak, of the employees. So that was one of the programs that I think had a big impact. But also you should have, as you said, starting from the top, always there should be a strong role modeling by the top management. They should understand a bit about the technology and its limitations, by the way, as well, not to be unrealistic. And they should be setting reasonable targets and show what value it is for business. It shouldn't be just for the sake of an interesting new toy, but it's something that should change our business. Should it change for good? Should it provide us with sustainable, positive differentiation on the market? I mean, this should be always behind it strategically. And then I think, as always, my last comment, super important is to show some benefits, right? You should be really tracking what is it bringing and make it really visible so that the people are getting adjusted. They're seeing that it's not hasn't killed anyone in the process. It hasn't hurt them. It has been inspirational. It has been fun to play with. And you also realize the value, right? You should be kind of AI value realization office, one of the names that as EY we applied in one of the projects. So you should be really showing where you're heading and that you bring something positive to the company.
It still feels like about the topic of value, which is always a critical one, because generally, I guess what we incentivize is what people tend to do, rightly so in a lot of cases. How do you think do organizations need to change how they measure, track, and realize value? Just to anecdotally, from my own experience, lots of automotive companies are still fairly traditional when it gets to business cases around sort of job one delays, around, of course, the traditional sort of sales volume, around profitability metrics. But they, of course, don't give you the sort of full picture, especially in the customer experience space, and GenAI could be a huge enabler there. What are your recommendations in terms of value management for GenAI for automotive companies?
Yeah. Well, I think you should really look strategically at the value map of your organization. So where you really create the value, and in the broader sense. And as you say rightly, it's a bit more complex for the OEMs when they look, especially in the back office agendas, or they look at this time to market, or they look, as you say, at the customer experience levels, or the or whatever, and net promoter scores and similar, right? It's less tangible, or even employee experience, right? Because one of the biggest challenges now everywhere is to get good people and keep them.
Yeah.
So how do you measure these? How do you really recognize the value? And also on the other hand, you prevent it's just window dressing, that somebody is making up, well, this has been a great POC we have been working on for 6 months, and it's now allowing us to be 2 times faster, but it hasn't really improved any quality matrix or efficiency matrix. So the PMO has got a tougher job, right? I think usually they are keeping this agenda. They should be following the portfolio of the projects that are running, see how they interact, and also kind of brutally prioritize, because here it should be even more evident than elsewhere that you may have hundreds and hundreds of possible use cases, and you should really quickly kill those that are not showing the scalability implications, or put them as a prior 2 or 3. So this is, I think, some of the basic recommendations. I know the OEMs are now overwhelmed. This is one of the biggest challenges now, given the cost focus now, and also so many fronts where you have to simultaneously fight in terms of e-mobility and the software enhancements and the new customer experience and supply chains and you name it, right? I don't think we have ever had before challenges on basically all the pillars that we have rested on for decades. Everything is now being questioned, challenged by competitors or geopolitics or whatever. So this is making the job, of course, much more difficult. Sometimes I even think that the big innovations in the traditional organizations, they probably have to happen outside of the main organization to really have a dedicated separate entity, which is kind of ring fencing and nurturing the new ideas until they can be put up there and they can survive the brutal comparison to other projects that run on the bigger scale.
Yeah. That does make a lot of sense, and leads me to one of the final points I want to talk about, which is sort of future trends. What are the sort of big trends you see in the space that might affect how automotive companies use GenAI moving forward?
Yeah. Well, there are many cases. I think the more sophisticated ones we only start touching or exploring, where you can use the intelligence of these models in being more effective. For example, in the shop floor activities, in arranging and optimizing planning on the shop floor, having much more kind of natural interactivity with some of your shop floor systems or MES systems or whatever, in defining your priorities and defining your asks as an operator or as a shift supervisor. So I think that's one of the topics. Second, I think would be the whole big theme. I mean, and forever big theme in terms of managing and orchestrating the whole ecosystem of suppliers. So how do you really keep track of your suppliers' financial financial health or overall health and perspective? How do you manage the interactions in terms of data sharing and data cleaning, in terms of the cooperative forecasting, for example, or whatever you do on in the supply chain overall? And then the product enhancement. I think the R&D has got a huge potential. We see already other sectors experimenting, like the life sciences being now really advanced in terms of trying new molecules in the elementary or basic stages of research. I think also in terms of new products, even from the basic in automotive, we may be applying the GenAI in terms of creativity, in terms of faster prototyping, etc. I don't think it's there yet. And even the whole better management, as we spoke about, the project managers being enhanced by AI tools in terms of how they deliver. Because frankly, one of the biggest gaps between some of the newcomers and the fresh, especially EV players, is in the time to market, where they out innovate us here in Europe 2.5 times, which is kind of unsustainable. And this is kind of my biggest worries when I'm talking to some of the OEMs. I say it's not only worrying that we are so much behind on some of the topics now, but how much behind at this pace of us versus competition we will be in 3 to 5 years. It will be unsustainable because we will be 10 years behind by then.
Yeah, it's driven by lots of the complexity and legacy, isn't it?
Absolutely. Part of it you may be kind of enhanced by the GenAI to handle the complexity and the kind of 100 years of adding on to your organization.
Final question from my side. If you would summarize, there were, of course, lots of recommendations throughout our conversation, but if you would summarize some of the most important recommendations you would make to senior leaders working in the automotive or related technology space, what would that be?
Well, unsurprisingly, given what I've already mentioned, I think part of the recommendation would be just don't treat it as something totally and completely from a new world in terms of the easiness or difficulty to implement and the good practice how to implement change in the organization. You still will have people around, even if with different skills or maybe a bit less, but you will be effectively doing still something for the organization, which will be a combination of people and some technology, and you will have to make it work together. So don't underestimate this change element that the organization will be going through. Even more sophisticated change, because it is a more advanced technology than some of the previous ones. And second, I would say the partnerships are very important here. It's kind of the do-it-yourself. It's no way to go. Some of the big OEMs, they still live in their whole complex world, comparing their 6, 7, 14, whatever brands across and trying to iterate and cross benchmark. But it's so much more going on outside of the organization, no matter how big you are, no matter if you Volkswagen, Toyota, Stellantis. There are kind of so many multiples, 100x, 1000x times more knowledge and experience going on outside that you need to leverage somehow. So partner with smaller or bigger partners and try to move along. And some of it is experimenting, and you cannot run yourself 1,000 experiments. you have to somehow share and then pick those that you can scale. And unfortunately, there will be many fails. And the OEMs are afraid of failing. The cultures are against the failing fast, right? So they are trying less things rather. Kind of the DNA says, let's try less, more safe things. Here, it's unfortunately, as with any fresh technology, many fails at the start. So be ready for that.
Thank you so much, Peter. That's been a fascinating conversation. Is there anything else you would like to share as a final word, or do you believe we've covered everything?
No, it's an amazing thing that you're trying to address specifically GenAI in automotive. I'm glad that we had a chance to talk. I will be looking forward to the next episodes and many other interesting guys you will have here on the show. So no, I think we discussed basically everything that we know at the moment, but it will be much more again in a week or two. So look forward how you follow this topic through. So thanks for being there.
Meet again. Thank you so much, Peter.